Good morning. Welcome back to the Cozy Creator Month. Welcome back to Colby's Cozy Cafe. Welcome. Happy Monday, happy November, and also happy daylight savings time. I woke up feeling like wild refreshed, and I'm sitting here like, man, that was some good sleep. No, I just got an extra hour of sleep, but that's okay. Like, we are here for it and we stand for it, okay? So, because I literally like get up and come straight to you guys at this desk for like the 1-0 people who are watching, I'm sure most of you are actually right now commuting to work or like getting kids ready for school. Definitely can relate to that. Just sent my little one out the door for her school. I wanted to continue recording these at around this time every morning anyway, because one, that's the time I can do it. And two, if you guys want the lessons to stream or to do a replay of a little bit later, then you have the opportunity to do so. FYI, I'm also thinking about, if I can, trying to do this maybe twice a day. And here's why. Um, Not, and this is actually for a selfish reason. Um, I'm starting to notice that my lessons are getting a little bit meatier and longer. So I am going to try to like shorten them. So I've actually pre-prepared the notes today. So I know you guys will be excited about that. But also, like, when I get into the zone, I just need more than like an hour, you know what I'm saying, with the work. And I actually was really in the zone yesterday. And then I had to kind of like close out the live and all of that. And I just don't feel like I was able to ride the wave or kind of like be in my bubble as much as I wanted to. So I'm gonna try to actually do these twice a day, except for the morning, we'll have like the lesson and the write-in. And then in the afternoon, I've created an ongoing studio where I'll just pop in and I'll just be writing, and people can pop in and pop off if they want to and just join. That one will be mostly like maybe like a silent one with some background music or what have you. But I want to make sure I'm hitting the writing as much as I can throughout the day, of course, around my day-to-day job, because I know the rest of us have to work too. In any case, let's jump right into it. Today, we are getting right into um, character, specifically character and their critical history. So without further ado, I am going to share my screen. Give me 1 second. Present. All right, now we are cooking with a whole bunch of grease. Love that. All right, so for the past 3 days, we have been going through the different stages of creating your novel project, right? Creating it and then doing some writing on it. The first day we did fleshing out your ideas. The next day we did world building. The third day, which was yesterday, we did external conflicts. And now the fourth day today, we're now going to jump into character and critical history. But what do I mean when I say character and critical history? Oh, I forgot to animate that bottom part, but that's okay. Um, Basically, a character's critical history, in my opinion, is a collection of formative events in a character's life and their reactions to these events that create who the character is when we meet them. Okay. And essentially, what I want to highlight here and what I'm actually going to highlight right now, one of the key words here is this is kind of who they are when we enter their lives as readers, right? So, what that means is that there are several aspects of a character and who they are as a person that have already been formed. And when we meet them, we are meeting them with all of these different formations. It's just like meeting somebody in real life, right? When you meet somebody new, whether it's a friend, lover, colleague, or what have you, they already carry a certain amount of baggage. And your journey with them, a lot of times, and vice versa, is you guys mutually kind of figuring out and unpacking that baggage, figuring out who the person is, what they're about, and how they got there, right? So, From my view, there are certain elements of a character's critical history, and identifying these key elements or key turning points for each of your characters is going to give them so much depth that your character design will write itself. I promise you. I promise you. Okay. Now, yesterday I talked about Jen Grisanti and her amazing TV writing toolkit. And in the TV writing toolkit, I told you that she deals with external conflict and she also deals with the character's internal conflict. So, a lot of what you see here are basically my summary notes or what I think is most important in building out a character and who they are. A lot of times we get confused, maybe not confused, we get caught up with the superficial aspects of who a character is, what they're about, um, how they look, whether they're handsome or attractive or beautiful or not, their body type, their skin color, hair color, eye color, what they wear. And that's all important, right? Because, as a novelist, you want to be able to make sure that their external is a reflection of who they are internally and gives information to the audience, right? In some instances, if you see a dude with sort of like backwards cap, baggy pants, a reefer t-shirt or something like that, you kind of understand based on that external interaction or external perspective, like what the guy is about or like what his perspective on life could be, right? Whereas the next day, the same guy might be wearing a three-piece tailored suit from Tom Ford and holding a briefcase with his hair slicked back. And then we get another piece of information of who this person might be from a different perspective, right? And seeing those images then together starts to build our understanding of maybe like certain aspects of that character's personality, right? But the external expressions of a character actually start from within. Okay. Who you are as a person, what you've gone through, what you value, like all those things is going to be reflected in how you carry yourself, in your dress, in your hairstyle, in your, intonation, in your confidence. Whether or not you keep good hygiene, whether or not, you feel it's necessary to show out and show up physically, or if you just like a more laissez-faire perspective, right? Okay, I'm giving off my laissez-faire today in my PJs, giving this little mini class. All right. So those things often are determined by who we are as people, or at least determined by who we are as a person in that particular moment in time, because we do have our ebbs and flows, right? So, bringing it back, it's not enough for you to just focus on the external physical appearance, or how they carry themselves or how they walk. We have to go a lot deeper. And how we do that is through the 10 elements of the critical history. Really, to be honest, you'll see that there's 10 elements here, but there are really kind of essentially seven core elements that you need to focus on. Elements eight through nine, sorry, excuse me, eight through 10 are really how they, as a person, react. Eight through nine are actual events and actual kind of external triggers, external pressures, right? External states. And when you develop eight through nine, you're really trying to figure out how elements one through seven allows the character to react to triggers eight through nine. But a person's reaction, what happens to them, what they manifest, is ultimately also a part of their personality. And you'll see what I mean in a second. All right. So let's go through the elements super quickly. The first element you want to think about when designing your character's critical history is some kind of traumatic event, or as they would say in Into the Spider-Verse, a canon event, right? So throughout our lives, we have a lot of canon events. Basically, these are big events in our lives that fundamentally change who we are and how we see the world. These could be positive events. These could be negative events. An example of a positive event, well, in certain people's cases, not everybody's, I suppose, but an example of a positive event might be a major life change, like a pregnancy for a baby that you've been wanting for a long time, a marriage to a spouse who you love deeply, somebody in their lives finally meeting their biological parents or something like that, right? Those are major life changing events, graduating from a program that you worked really hard through, etc. On the flip side, there are other traumatic events that might happen in a character's life. I'm going to go a little bit NSFW, trigger warnings. There might be a death, right, that this character is contending with. I'm thinking about Into the Spider-Verse. That canon event would be like the death of Uncle Ben, right? That gets Peter Parker or really Into the Spider-Verse is about Miles Morales, but like gets Peter Parker slash Miles Morales slash the Spider Men and Spider Women off the bench and into the game to become protectors of New York City, right? So it could be the death of someone. It could be the destruction of a place or thing. It can be a divorce. It can be an assault. It can be some kind of relationship with a family member or friend that blew up because something happened, right? So the first thing we have to do is define what is the most impactful canon event, traumatic event that this character has gone through up until the point that we meet the character. Okay. The second that you have to decide is, based on that traumatic event, what is then the resulting wound, right? So something happens, like you lose a person, they pass away, and there's a void that is open inside of you, right? Maybe you had unresolved issues with that person and you refuse to talk to them. And I'm talking about the character, really. Maybe the day before you're ready to go talk to them, like you're planning to go talk to them, finally, they pass away. All right. I'm going to use, I'm not, because I don't want to spoil it, because I'm thinking about The Last of Us, right? They're in both games. If you play the games, there are traumatic events that are happening, and there are resulting wounds as a result. Matter of fact, let's just go into Last of Us. I won't try to be too detailed, but I just need an example so that you guys understand and can follow along with what I'm doing. In The Last of Us, the traumatic event is that the main character, Joel, loses somebody very, very, very close to him, right? His daughter gets killed. And if you don't, haven't seen it, or you want to see it, or what have you, then you might want to skip ahead in this live to a little bit later, because I will have another example. But there's an outbreak, like not a viral, like a fungal outbreak that's turning people into, these monsters or whatever. And his daughter gets shot. She doesn't even get killed by one of the monsters. She gets killed by another human being who's trying to prevent infected people from coming into their compound. And this man, this soldier, having been given orders to kill Joel and his daughter, Sarah, I believe her name is, right? And they're not even infected. Like, he ends up shooting at them, hits Joel, but kills Sarah, and Joel is destroyed for life, right? The next thing so that's his canon event. He was like a good, hardworking dad, nice guy or whatever. That was his canon event. In developing his character, then we go into the resulting wounds. The resulting wounds, this is why I love the game so much. I actually love the game a lot more than I like the TV series. No shade, because the actors are great in the TV series, but the game really hits home. Excuse me. I should get some water to make sure I'm not coughing into the mic. The resulting wound is that, and I keep hitting my keyboard, is that he does not open himself up to anybody, right? He's cold. He's, to a certain degree, heartless. He doesn't want any attachments. He's about survival. And that is it. Like, basically, the death of his daughter just killed his humanity, right? That is his wound. He does not open himself up. He is invulnerable. The reason behind that wound is because he has this fear, right? Because he was wounded by this traumatic event, and his wound is now invulnerability. The wound is based around a fear. The fear is losing someone else, right? If he gets attached, if he allows himself to be vulnerable, right? If he allows himself to love again, he is afraid, especially in this world where life is very uncertain and the monsters are still out there and people die every day. He is afraid that the moment he starts to love someone or something again, it's going to be taken away, right? So that is his ultimate fear. losing someone that he loves again. The resulting narrative and worldview is now how he sees the world around him based on the traumatic events, the resulting wounds that he carries from that event, and then the fear, right, around the wounds, or the fear that powers the wounds, right? So his new narrative and worldview is that I am alone. It is better to be alone. And I would say it's good to, when you're putting together a character's narrative and worldview, it should be an I statement. I believe it's better to be alone. I am alone. When I am alone, I cannot be hurt. When I am not attached to people, they cannot hurt me. Like, you know, I'm kind of just listing out a bunch of narratives and worldviews that he might be holding. Um, when I do not attach to people, I cannot be hurt when they die, and they will die, you know? So I hope that you guys are following this. So in terms of building up the character's critical history, like 1 through 4 are key. Another key element is the resulting flaw, right? So the flaw is basically like, you've been wounded, you know what your wound is, you know what your fear is, like the wound has now caused this fear of losing people in Joel. So now he has these I statements that he operates on where he is refusing to get attached because he doesn't want to lose people. And so now the flaw in him is that he doesn't get attached. It's basically the action that the character takes based on the first 4 elements of their critical history. All right. So his flaw is that he doesn't trust people. His flaw is that one of his flaws at least, is that at least in the beginning, he will leave you behind in a heartbeat. Okay. He doesn't trust people. He doesn't get attached to people. Right. And so setting up all 5 of these elements of a character's critical history is really important, because the entire story, the character arc, which we're going to build in a couple of days, is based solely and specifically on taking the character from point A in their traumatic event, wound, fear, narrative, and flaw to point Z, right? Where elements 1 through 5 at point A are the complete opposite of where the character is at point Z. So, just to give you sort of a mini preview of what the character arc is about, if the traumatic event in the beginning for Joel was being unable to save his daughter, then then the healing event at the end is that he is able to save a daughter figure, right? If the resulting wound in the beginning is that, when you get attached to people, or when he got attached to his daughter and she died, his whole heart was torn out, right? And like he felt like he couldn't attach to anybody anymore, like he literally can't. If that's what happens in the beginning, then in the end, at point Z, he is able to attach to somebody. He is able to love again. For number 3, if he is afraid to love again and afraid to be vulnerable, at the end of that journey, he is not afraid to love again. He's not afraid to be vulnerable. And we see actual moments of vulnerability, right? Et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not going to take you through, A to Z on all 10 of these elements, or all 7 of these elements. But setting up a very strong opening picture of the character through their character's critical history is going to really set you up to put together an amazing character arc over the course of your story, such that the person that you see on page 1 is a completely different person, or at least mostly different person than the person you see on the end and final page in your novel, or in your series, or in that season. Okay. All right. So let's continue, because I kind of got a little bit ahead of myself. Another part of the character's critical history is that because of their canon event, their wound, their fear, their narrative, and their flaw, which, combines all of their, how do you say? it creates a whole sort of miasma of who they are. They have a resulting goal, right? So at first, his goal was to protect Sarah, his daughter, get them to a safe place. His resulting goal now is that he just is out there to survive. He believes the survival of the fittest. He works only for money. Everything he does is transactional. He has really very few to little feelings for anyone or anything. Okay. And so his ultimate goal that comes from his current self is he's just out there to survive. And as a result, number 7, his ethics are how he wants to achieve that goal, right? And how he achieves his goal of survival is brutal. The man is vicious, okay? And we'll find out a lot more about his viciousness and his ethics, his methodology throughout the story, right? And so the story of, once again, not just his elements, his first 5 elements, but also his goal, which is going to change by the end of the series or the end of the story, and the way he goes about his goal, that's also going to change, right? So all 7 of these elements of a character's critical history really help to paint a very multidimensional picture of who that character is, why they are the way they are, what their fears are, what their resulting flaws are, what their narrative and worldview is, what their goal is, like that comes out of all of that damage, and then how they achieve that goal, how that comes out um, from who they are as a flawed person, right? So you build those first 7 elements of each character, and again, it doesn't have to be a traumatic event always. It can also just be like a regular canon event that changes their life. Regardless of how you build out your character with elements 1 through 7, though, it is element 8 that is going to force the character to turn and face all of those elements of their personality. So if the character had a traumatic event, is wounded and invulnerable and untrusting, is afraid to lose people, right? What they do when you meet the character is going to continue the cycle of dysfunction. The inciting incident, which is the external trigger, the external event, the nuke that blows up in their life, which is when we meet them, the inciting incident is going to force that person to call all of his critical history into question. So in Joel's case, all right, something happens that forces him to face who he has become, right? The inciting incident. Basically, he gets roped in to saving or escorting this girl, right, Ellie, to a place far out west, right? Because Ellie, as he discovers, actually carries the cure for the cordyceps pandemic, right? The cordyceps virus or cordyceps fungal pandemic. And of course, obviously, Ellie is around the same age that his daughter Sarah was when Sarah was murdered. So, this entire time, for the past 10 years after Sarah's death, he has been avoiding processing Sarah's death. He's been avoiding even looking at pictures of Sarah. He's been avoiding thinking about Sarah. He's been avoiding facing all of his wounds and his fears and his flaws that came out of losing Sarah. But now, this inciting incident, Ellie coming into his life and needing his help, is going to force him to face all of those things. Your character is going this way, they're moving from left to right. And then the exciting incident, forces them to stop and turn and look at everything that they've become and forces them to face that, right? So, in the inciting incident, when you're building that for your character, you're trying to create a situation that is so how do you say, so massive and so disruptive that the character cannot ignore it. Okay. And so it has to be, in my opinion, relatively big. Okay. In The Last of Us, it's Ellie needing his help and needing it like immediately, to get across, so they can find a cure for the cordyceps outbreak. In I had another thing in my brain. I don't know. It escapes me. In Game of Thrones, right? It's Ned Stark being called to serve as the king's hand, right? The hand of the king. But him having or feeling like he's duty bound to do this because he has found out that the former hand of the king was actually murdered and it was an inside job and the king is in danger. And he is honor bound to not only serve the king because the king has requested him to, but to find out who the murderer is and to solve the mystery, right? Um, yeah, I don't want to go on too many tangents because I don't want this to get too long, but you see what I'm trying to do here, right? Big major inciting incident for those of you who are Spider-Man fans, obviously, like uh usually the inciting incident for Peter Parker Miles Morales is the spider biting him, but that's really more of a, I would say, devil in the doorway moment, right? Because essentially you can be bit by the spider, but you can still kind of choose not to engage. Something usually bigger ends up happening, which is like an enemy attacks, right? Okay. So now that you've decided what your inciting incident is, what that big major nuke is for your character that forces them to stop and forces them to face themselves and face the external conflict that we discussed yesterday. Now we're into the resulting dilemma, right? And I actually am not going to flesh out the full definition of dilemma because, frankly, I'm not going to do it as well as Jen Grisanti does in her book, right? A dilemma is essentially where you have two options, right? And neither option is really particularly ideal because of this inciting incident, because of this major event. One option, however, allows you to stay in your current world, and allows you to remain who you are. The other option forces you to take action and enter, a new world, but there are also stakes and drawbacks with that, right? So it's basically it's a double-edged sword in certain ways, and there are consequences for both. So it's best for you when you're trying to develop this dilemma, think about the inciting incident and ask yourself, what are the two options that this character has? In Joel's case, and he tries to do this, he can ignore Ellie. He can ignore the fact that there is a literal cure for the virus that has been dropped on him last minute, and he can continue to live out his life. And if he does, he won't have to face having to get attached to somebody new. He won't have to he won't have to be faced with having to protect somebody, even though he feels like he can't protect her. He won't have to face himself and his sorrow and his grief. But the result of that is that the world will keep dying because he chose to stay where he is. The other half of this, and this is why it's called a dilemma, because it's sort of like not ideal either way. The other half of this is that he actually chooses to take Ellie across the United States. And he ultimately has a chance of saving the world, but this also is going to force him into some really, really dark, harsh territory around what he feels about himself, how he feels about the loss of his daughter, and the fact that Ellie is ultimately going to become this daughter figure to him that he does love very much. But a part of being a part of freeing himself from his current shackles means that he's not only going to have a good relationship, father daughter relationship with Ellie, but he is now vulnerable again because in this world, most people die. And so, in healing his wounds, in facing his fears, in fixing his flaws and his narrative and worldview, that's a good thing. But you now open yourself up to losing everything all over again. So the resulting dilemma is really the character's internal struggle between remaining in who they are with positives and negatives, and then becoming somebody new, also with positives and negatives, right? With great power, with great choices come great responsibility, et cetera, et cetera. And then number 10, let's talk about the stakes and the fork in the road. So the resulting dilemma is the internal um, benefits and drawbacks. The stakes and the forks in the road are really more about what's going to happen to the external world, right? If this character really doesn't do anything, what is at stake? And so, in many ways, the resulting dilemma and the stakes are related. I just feel like the stakes are more about the external world and what's going to happen to it. And the resulting dilemma is more about the character's internal world, if that makes sense, right? Okay. After you have drawn up all 10 of these elements, I promise you, your character is going to start writing his and herself, right? Like, this has happened for me so many times with characters, and I'm really confident that like you will have a better understanding of that character. And if somehow you don't, or like it only gives you a little bit more information, then start maybe more externally. Start with like, you know, the superficial hair look, the bare man chest, whatever, and that could spark something too. But I feel like these 10 particular elements of a character's critical history are a great starting place so that you truly understand who your character is. And I feel like the rest of their world and the rest of who they are as a person will flow from that. Okay. One final consideration that you always want to think about when you're putting, after you're done putting your character's critical history together, is how will the external conflict force the character to face, conquer, and heal parts 2 through 7 of their critical history. And I talked about that earlier on, maybe a few minutes ago. But this is just something to think about and to reflect and meditate on, because we are going to be talking about character arc more specifically and more idiosyncratically in a couple of days. But you want to think about not just putting together a really complex, I can never speak, multi-dimensional and um, nuanced character. That's important. But when you pick an external trigger, the inciting incident, the external conflict, you really want to think about how that conflict is going to force the character to re-articulate every single one of their critical history points as they go about this journey. If the external conflict is not forcing the character to face their issues, put them on a journey where they're going to systematically, whether they want to or not, conquer their issues, and then in the end heal their issues, then I don't think you've done enough work on the critical history. Because that opening image of a character in any story should definitely be a really sharp or at least interesting contrast to the closing image. This kind of hits a little bit differently for novel series, like when you're doing book after book after book after book. However, I do think that even over the course of an entire series, you can create these 10 elements for the character as they develop. We always are moving and evolving through life, right? So even if a character has healed a wound or whatever in the first book, there might be another wound or fear or narrative that they now have to face in the second book. Or their new evolution to who they were at the end of the first book might be great, but it might present new problems, right? Remember the resulting dilemma for Joel's story, right? So he might heal his internal struggle with uh, his loss of Sarah and his, mentorship and protection of Ellie, but that's going to present some new problems. What if Ellie comes into more danger in the second installment? And he has to face now, once again, the fear of losing someone, and new wounds, new fears, new traumatic or canonical events happen, right? So there's always a way to continue to evolve your character. And I think that just tracking their critical history, whether it's a standalone work or it's a series, just tracking it and planning for it across each book, across each season, across each screenplay is really going to help you create a character that is really interesting, really nuanced, and continues to develop. All right, let's move forward. Okay. So, oh, I actually meant to add in an image here. Let me do this here. But I wanted to just take you guys quickly through an example from iRobot, right? Oops. I wanted to put an image here. Just make it kind of like, oh, nope, nope. Y'all watching me struggle. Hold on. Yeah, I actually didn't quite finish my little notes here. And that is okay. That is a-okay. I'll make it look cuter for when I create the slides for you guys a little bit later. Okay. So this particular slide is about giving you guys a clear example of how the 10 elements of a character's critical history can really, really come together to create a great story and a great character journey. All right. Um, I actually started writing and developing this journey for iRobot yesterday. And I enjoyed it so much, breaking it down and everything, that I started watching the movie. It's one of my favorite movies. Um, and it's a really wonderful example of how a character's critical history can really give a story an emotional punch and impact, right? So let me actually just take this here. All right, I'm gonna say example, I robots. And for those of you who are not familiar, I Robot was adapted, I believe, from Isaac Asimov's works, some of his short stories, I think his book, and then there were some elements of like a couple of his short stories in there as well. But basically, this is a futuristic sci-fi action movie that deals with AI, robotics, and the questions about humanity, right? And so in this movie, basically, our world has advanced. It's funny because the year in this movie is 2035, and we're actually only about 10 years away from that in real life. And I don't know if we'll have like automatic AI and robots. We have great AI now, but like I don't know how much it's going to evolve in the next 10 years. But in this movie, it is year 2035, and robots essentially have become a part of daily life for all mankind, right? And so, there are maids, they do our garbage collection, they run errands for us, they help us cook, like they are integrated, right? And so, in this movie, though, we have Detective Del Spooner, who, uh, in contrast to everybody else around him, basically, he chooses not to go high tech the way everybody else does. He doesn't like robots, he doesn't trust robots. Everything in his house is operated like via analog control or some kind of digital manual control. It's not voice activated. Like he's very much like while everybody else is like in like their robot maid era, he is still taking remotes and like clicking them to get stuff to turn on, and everything is like, you know, analog, right? And that's actually a really great example, y'all, of how the internal affects the external. Because if you actually look at, and if you watch the movie, if you look at his apartment, you sort of think like this apartment looks like a 2024 apartment, right? And then you look outside and everything else looks like it's 1,000 years evolved into the future. And the reason why he keeps his entire space analog is because he does not trust AI. He does not trust robots, right? So in his situation, and if you haven't seen it, you should see it, right? Um, his traumatic event was that he's a cop, right? He's a cop. He and a girl were drowning. Spooner tries to save the girl, but an AI robot, in its attempt to help, decides to save Spooner because Spooner logically has a greater chance of living than the girl does. Right? Super traumatic event. He ends up living, the girl ends up dying. Right? And the resulting wound is that Spooner hates and distrusts robots and AI, and believes they are a threat to mankind because they do not have the human components needed for compassion and connection. This makes life hard for him as robots slash AI. Oh, hello. Come through, grammar. Hold on a second. Have permeated every single aspect of modern human life, right? So that is his wound. He had to watch an innocent girl, she was only 12, drown because this robot came along. And instead of saving the girl, the robot ended up saving him. And the reason was this. I put the quote up here at top. Spooner says, I was the logical choice. It calculated that I had a 45% chance of survival. Sarah only had an 11% chance. That was somebody's baby. 11% is more than enough. A human being would have known that. So I just felt like this was a very powerful quote that really encapsulated who Spooner was, why he hated robots, why he did not trust robots, right? And I actually would encourage you guys to do the same as you're building out your character. Like, whatever their traumatic event is or was, have them, let's say that you're at the point in the movie or the situation, right, where they're explaining their trauma to somebody and they're explaining what exactly happened to them that made them who they are. Give them a quote. This quote was very powerful, especially because Will Smith is a wonderful actor. He's an amazing actor. And so he was really able to evoke the emotion here. And he just believes that these robots are, quote, lights and clockwork. And this quote, it encapsulates the wound so clearly, right? That humans have a far better understanding of what is right and wrong than robots do. And that because of that, we should never trust robots. Human beings, and he's not wrong about that. Like, a human being, having seen the situation, would have probably left him to drown and tried to save the kid, because we value the lives of children in many ways over the lives of adults, because we see them as innocent and at the beginnings of their lives, right? And so it was just a very powerful quote that really encapsulated his traumatic event and his resulting wound, right? As a result of this event and wound, his fear is that humans rely too much on machines and it will lead to our ruin. His resulting narrative and worldview is that AI robots are dangerous and cannot be trusted due to their lack of humanity and human insight. His flaw is that because he now hates and mistrusts robots, he becomes obsessed with targeting and excluding them from human life. He fails to see the good they bring to society. And I'm also going to put here that he's eager to show how they are bad, right? So he's always looking for that malfunctioning, bad robot that's going to prove his point, right? That these things are not good for humanity. We should not integrate them in our day-to-day lives. We should not lean on them as much as we do. So because his flaw is that he hates and mistrusts robots, and he's become obsessed with targeting them, he wants to show how they're bad. His goal is to show people and to prove to the world that robots are dangerous and harmful and they have no place in society, right? His ethics in achieving that goal is that because he believes that he's the only sane human left who sees the robots for who they are, Spooner is bullish, hot-headed, and breaks the rules in order to show people just how untrustworthy this robot revolution is. Okay? So all of these things come together to create a really rich narrative of who this guy is. Now that you understand his elements from 1 through 7, you can start building things about him and around him, right, that reflect who he is. All right. One part about this is that I think I want to add another element here, but I'm not going to do it now. What he doesn't tell anybody, what he's sort of ashamed about, honestly, is that even though he hates robots and robotics, he himself is also part robot, and it bothers him. The reason why he's part robot is because even though, he survived, the drowning incident, a lot of his lung was damaged, and his basically his left lung, his arm, his hand, everything was completely damaged. It couldn't work anymore, and he lost a lung. And a doctor named Dr. Lanning actually used robotics and used a prosthetics replacement program to save his life on the operating table. So he gave him a new lung. It's like a cybernetic lung, I believe. And then he gave him a whole new arm with like a spray on skin. So he looks normal, but like literally like the top left half of him is not even human anymore. Right. But nobody knows that but him. And so it kind of is a steady reminder of that ongoing wound, of how he got that implant, but also what had to be sacrificed in exchange for his survival, right? And if you watch the movie, the bit of irony is, and it's always good to have a bit of irony, is that the very thing that he hates in life and hates about himself is the thing that allows him to save the world. So if you haven't seen the movie, then definitely check it out. And you'll see kind of how the very thing that he's been fighting against the entire time actually helps to save him. And that actually is a wonderful screenwriting trope and storytelling trope when you're able to make it happen, is to take that one thing that the character never thought could ever help them, the one thing that they hate, the one thing that they resent, the one thing that they fear, and turn it into a strength. All right. So that's going to be somewhere, in this critical history or maybe in the character arc portion, but that's just something that you should put a note in. Okay. Now, for situations 8 through 9, I'm going to type these in as I'm telling you guys, then we're going to wrap up and get to our writing session. Is Spooner is stuck in his cycle of dysfunction, right? He's always looking for the bad robot. He has these horrible dreams where he keeps dreaming about the girl who died. He's haunted by that traumatic event, and he can't escape it. And it's like he can't, in his current state, with his current viewpoint, his current worldview and flaw, he cannot heal that wounded part of him. However, the inciting incident is that a close mentor of Spooner's, Dr. Lanning, who also helped to save his life with the cybernetic implant, he is, well, murdered. Like when he first gets to the crime scene, it looks like Dr. Lanning committed suicide. All right. It turns out that Dr. Lanning was actually murdered. It was a pre-planned self-murder or whatever that he asked an AI robot to do, because Dr. Lanning was trying to warn Spooner about basically an oncoming robot revolution, right? But the inciting incident basically forces Spooner to investigate Dr. Lanning's death. And Dr. Lanning chose Spooner because he knew that Spooner hated the robot so much that he would be the one person to go and do his best to figure out what's going on and to assume that he was murdered, that Lanning was murdered by a robot, and try to follow that thread. He knew him so well that he chose him basically so that Spooner could face himself, and in facing himself, save the world, right? So when Dr. Lanning is murdered and Spooner is forced to figure out what's going on, there is a resulting dilemma. So the dilemma here is that Spooner can choose to ignore his suspicion that a robot killed Lanning, but he will always be haunted by his wounds and bugged by the weirdness of the suicide, right? That's one aspect. The other aspect is Spooner can choose to to investigate Lanning's murder, but he will be further, outcast by his fellow compatriots. That's kind of like a long way of saying that. Because right now, the way that Spooner is operating in the world is that because he's so suspicious of robots and he's sort of a hothead, he's bullish, and he's obsessed with proving that they're, not good. He kind of has this reputation amongst his family, his friends, and his colleagues as being paranoid, as being too uptight. Um, and he's also kind of shaking the tree a little bit because robots are now a very economically viable resource, and they're also very politically intertwined. So there's a lot of pork in that barrel, so to speak, right? And so now politicians and the CEO of USR, which makes robotics, they are invested economically and politically in making sure that robots are seen as safe and are seen as a help to mankind, because their money and their reputations and their legal freedoms are tied up in robots basically being safe. Okay. And so, in choosing to pursue this as a murder investigation, Spooner risks further getting exiled. But then at the same time, he also um, risks solving what's actually going on here. And so, the stakes in the fork in the road basically is that if Spooner doesn't pursue this investigation, he will allow the world to be, how do you say? I don't want to say colonized, but that's like the best word I can think of right now. Colonized by the robots who are being controlled by, I'm going to say, an authoritarian AI, which is actually what ends up happening. But he's able to save the world just in time. I know this is spelled wrong and it's bugging me that I don't. Guys, I'm a writer, I swear. Okay. All right. So now that we have all this built out, we can pretty much create any type of character story we want, because we know what his flaws are. We know how he has to face those flaws, and we know what the stakes are, and we know what he has to sort of contend with. As a result, you can ask yourself, if you want to build out his physical world, who he is, like physically, how his environment is, like somebody who doesn't trust robots or AI at all obviously would swing in the direction of having a more analog life, right? So the screenwriter was very smart in that, because he doesn't trust robots, he reflected that mistrust of robots in Spooner's surroundings. And as I said earlier, everything that he uses remote control, is analog, like it's not high tech at all. It's not voice activated. It's not integrated into an uplink somewhere. It's not controlled by AI at all. Okay. And that tells us, it gives us a lot of visual information about who this character is. He also chooses to drive his car manually, even though, there's not really any non-AI cars available, but he chooses to drive his car manually because he does not want a robot in control of his car. He also has a motorcycle which runs on gas, right? And he's like one of the only people in the whole movie who actually does these things and has these things. And turns out his paranoia helps him to save the world in the end. But at the end of the movie, as I mentioned as well, the integration of his fear and his old self with his new acceptance of robotics being, a potential advantage to mankind, allows him to save Vicky. He has to kind of like slide down this really long, um, like neural kinetic network. And he couldn't have done that using his human hand. His human hand would have been burned off, but he uses his metal hand to slide down like thousands of feet and land on Vicky's neural brain. And he kills her with some nanites so that she can stop controlling the robots and stop controlling the world, right? And if he didn't have that part of himself, if he didn't use the robotic part of himself, he would not have been able to save the world as he did. All right. So that is an example of how to build out an entire critical history for a character. I gave you an example of how the critical history can reflect itself upon the character's external features and his surroundings and kind of how he lives. And then I also gave you some examples of how to create a sense of irony, where in order to heal oneself and get from point A to point B, yes, they are, to a certain degree, they do have some of them, their old selves left, but their new perspective on life, their integration of what used to hurt them into who they are today actually helps to heal them and helps to solve the external problem. All right, y'all. So that is pretty much for that. We are going to start our writing session in about a minute. So let me pop up on the screen. First, I just want to remind you, Colby's, let me present so you can actually see. Colby's Cozy Cafe is open for writing and for downloading some really awesome books. I went through what books are available yesterday and the day before. The same 3 promos are going to be available. I'm going to be pretty much promoting these promos and these free book downloads for the rest of the week until November 9th, where you're going to get sort of a new, fresh collection of promos. Also, the book of the day is the same book that we did yesterday. That's Jen Basanti's TV Writing Toolkit, because she explains this whole process of building out a character, I think, in a way that is much more succinct and much more impactful. I added certain things to my process of building characters, but I think her process as is will be sufficient and wonderful. The link to that is below. And then also we still have our Cozy Creator giveaway and Manga Madness giveaways going on as well. And now we are going to jump into the prompts, and we're going to deal with the character and critical history today. And if you are into any one of these genres, there is something for you. Let me change the view so you can see it. Nope. Less me, more of you. Boom. There we go. All right, team. So I have work in 20 minutes. I don't know when your work is going to be, but we're going to keep the live up until I got to go. Happy writing, and drop any comments, questions in the chat. Oh, hey, SD. She said like an hour ago. And I'm just seeing it. How you doing, sis? All right. Thanks for coming through. Okay, team, we are going to do our background music. Happy writing. right, my loves, it is now 9 o'clock, which means I have to clock in for work. And I know that you guys have to kind of get on with your days as well. So we are going to wrap it up. And I did start putting together these slides and uploaded them to my Google Drive, and I will share them in the link in my description as of tomorrow. Okay, I just want to make sure that all the sharing privileges are kind of open and, doing what they need to do, giving what they need to give, so that you guys can actually access each lesson for each day. So we have days 0 through 4. I hope that you guys are getting a lot out of these little mini writing lessons. Again, this is our NaNoWriMo rebrands. I was actually getting some great writing done on my next book in the Books of Ezekiel series called Fraternity. So I'm really excited. And I hope that you guys will keep joining me. I'm also probably going to be on here a little bit later after work is over, probably like around 5:30, not with the formal writing class, but just like logging in and doing some live writing, only because like I know writing can be an isolating thing. So if we're going to write, we might as well just like write online together, like quietly or not quietly, however you choose. Okay. But my loves, thank you so much for joining me. Keep writing, keep creating, keep showing up, and I will see you guys next time. Oh, and don't forget to grab the free books and don't forget to join the giveaways. All right. Bye.